After you've sight read a piece, what do you do? And what should you do? Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Manu from Piano Sight Reading, where I give sight reading tips to pianists. And in this video, I'm going to give you 5 questions that you should ask yourself after you sight read a piece. In this video, where I talk about how to improve your sight reading faster, I give you questions to ask yourself before sight reading a piece. So let me ask you this. Do you ask yourself questions after you sight read a piece? If you replied no, then you're probably not the only one. In fact, you're probably in the majority. And to be honest, I was like that too, until recently, when I learned about the importance of asking questions. And so one day I thought, what questions should you ask yourself after sight reading a piece? So that's where the idea of this video came in. In today's world, we've become so used to just do one activity and then moving to the next and the next and the next. But when do we actually stop and think about what we just did? When do we reflect on what we did? And don't you think we would gain so much more insight if we actually stopped and thought about what we just did? Don't you think it would be worthwhile looking back at what you just did and ask yourself, what have I learned here? Wouldn't we gain so much more insight by doing that? Now, when I'm saying activities, I don't mean washing the dishes or brushing your teeth. I'm talking about activities where you're practicing a skill, right? Where you're doing deliberate practice. And sight reading would be such an activity. So what I'm proposing is that you ask yourself a series of questions after you sight read a piece. That way you can learn from your experience and actually apply what you learned for future sight reading pieces. The very first question I would like you to ask after you sight read a piece is, what did I do well? Okay, always start with that, because you want to start with the positive. No matter how small or big your wins are, always celebrate them. So what did you do well? It could be that you played all the F sharps, or that you did the rhythm really well, or maybe you read the intervals really well. So spend a bit of time there, ask yourself what you did well, and keep asking this question until you have at least one answer. Okay, now once you've done that, then you can ask what didn't go so well. So it's always good to also ask this question, because it helps you know what to focus on next time. And once you've worked out what didn't go so well, ask yourself what types of errors you made. Were the mistakes rhythmic mistakes? Or perhaps you misread some notes? Or was it more like technical mistakes? Like you weren't able to properly execute something? Answering this question will help you know what caused the mistake in the first place. And then that can help you avoid doing the same mistake next time. As Joseph Campbell once said, where you stumble, there your treasure is. Now, sight reading isn't all about notes and rhythm. How about the mood or the character of the piece? Were you able to convey the character and the mood of the piece? This would be a good question to ask. At a rudimentary level, this would mean playing the dynamics or the articulation. And at a more advanced level, this would mean playing with rubato, playing the voicing, or playing the phrasing. Another great question to ask is, what can I do to improve next time? So with the first questions that you've asked, you will have worked out what needs more work, well, go a step further and ask yourself, okay, what can I actually do to improve next time? Now, it could simply be to sight read at a slower pace, because when you take things slower, everything becomes easier. Or it could be that you need to find a better fingering. Maybe the errors you made were actually because the fingering wasn't so good. So it could just be that you need to find a better fingering. Or maybe it stems from a lack of technical skills. So, for example, maybe there was a passage with octaves, and although you knew there were octaves, maybe you weren't so good at playing them. So maybe you need to just practice playing octaves. And the final question to ask after you've done your sight reading practice is, what have I learned from today's sight reading practice session? And the answers you come up with, those will help you know what to actually focus on in your daily practice. So, like the example I mentioned earlier, where you might have had a passage with octaves, maybe you didn't sight read that so well because you weren't so good at playing the octaves. So that means in your general piano practice, you could spend a bit of time playing octaves. So work out what needs more work and then try to implement that in your piano practice. Now, with these questions, you can either go through them mentally, or better still, write them in a practice journal, because that way you can refer to them at a later stage. So those were the 5 questions to ask yourself after sight reading a piece. Let me leave you with one final question. What other questions could you ask yourself after sight reading a piece, of course? Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Happy sight reading!